I would like to bring out Andrew Keen, who's a great author, podcaster, interviewer, wrote a book called The Internet Is Not the Answer, which was some years ago, but is pertinent to this topic. What's your most recent book?
How to Fix the Future.
Yeah, he takes the big picture view. So I'm not in charge. He's really in charge of this session.
I thought we got 20 minutes, David.
Well, I can't help it. I don't control that. Just start.
Oh, we went out. You've got to speak up. So, yeah, so rather than David doing the interviewing, I'm interviewing David about whether or not the internet industry is imploding. The headlines these days are dominated by the apparent implosion of the internet industry, economy, everything from the Musk thing at Twitter to obviously what's happening at Facebook. David's a great authority on that.
Do you see what they did to the timer?
Yeah, I saw they put it back up.
Okay.
And today, a little bit of news about Google, David, that activist investors are now trying to press them to make cuts.
Including in Waymo, by the way.
And I have to note, there's a certain sort of delicious irony about an Amazon person making speeches about the civilizational value of AI on the day that Amazon laid off 10,000 people, but that's an aside.
I don't think he decided that. He didn't have anything to do with that.
I didn't suggest he did, but perhaps that speaks to the paradoxes of the digital economy. Anyway, David.
Yeah, it does.
The implosion of the internet industry, you've suggested privately to me that rather than an implosion, it's the normalization of the internet economy. Just talk more about that.
Well, for anybody who doesn't know, I wrote a book about Facebook 12 years ago, and I've been thinking a lot about the trajectory of these giant companies for pretty much since they existed. And, you know, the story of markets in the last decade has been that a very small number of companies defined global financial markets and defined an upward trajectory that was unprecedented and led to the creation for the first time ever of companies worth $1 trillion or more. So now we have Microsoft worth over $2 trillion. Facebook almost touched $1 trillion. I don't know all the valuations, but Amazon's worth well over $1 trillion. I think Google is in that ballpark now. This has never been seen in the history of business, capitalism, humanity. The scale of influence that a small number of companies had, both as a social force and as a creator of wealth in society. So the question is, was that a good thing? And is it a good thing that it definitely right now seems to be ending in a definitive way? And I would say possibly both were good things. It may be a good thing that the internet industry was so overvalued and over-believed in, so to speak, that it kind of pulled in its wake an enormous set of social transformations that we're all benefiting from, anytime we go on our phone, and that's a good thing. But the reality is, these are just businesses like every other business. And as you say, right now, I think that what we are learning is that, was it today that, did Amazon actually lay off 10,000 today? I know they were being said to be about to do that. I missed that. And as Andrew said, an investor that owns $6 billion worth of Alphabet shares has just said they've got to cut costs. That's a new thing, because these companies have never been subject to that sort of pressure before, because they were going to the moon. And, the pace of...
Well, they thought they were going to the moon.
But investors took them to the moon. And Tesla is another one, which is now on a somewhat downward trajectory. These companies are still, for the most part, extraordinary profit engines that are here for the duration. They're very, very successful, healthy companies. But they are not going to go to the moon.
Right.
And in fact, what it also, I think, shows is that there will be a new phase, which may be beginning now, where a different set of companies will eventually lead
right.
the
So
economy
that's the
forward.
real. But the real interesting historical question is: we always have these kind of conversations after every bust. Is this the end, or is this the beginning of a new chapter? So I discussed your piece with Keith Tier-Genet's here on my. He's a prominent Silicon Valley investor, an entrepreneur. And he says, well, everyone's always written this thing off, and the next big thing is AI. The next big thing, maybe according to Nina Schick, although I'm not convinced of it, is this generative creative stuff. Are you missing the big picture, David? Are you writing this thing off before the next wave of...
If anybody's missing the big picture, they don't know it, Andrew. Maybe, maybe. What do you think? You mean this is a conversation? What do you think?
Well, I'm always amused with the ironies. I think that the idea in Silicon Valley is that the next big thing is around the corner. And that explains, for example, Musk. Musk is trying to defy the laws of gravitational history, if you like, by trying to make Twitter into a startup and going back to the beginning. So oddly enough, in Silicon Valley, with people like Musk, there's a nostalgia for a startup culture and a startup economy that probably no longer exists. I'm also curious on Facebook. I mean, is for you, Facebook, seems to me as if the metaverse is, we did a session here on the metaverse and no one even knows what it is. Is the metaverse for Zuckerberg the last stand, the last refuge of a man who's lost his way and indeed has no way forward, so he's fallen back on the metaverse, which no one knows what it is, and if they do, no one wants to go there?
You put it so well, Andrew. But I think in a sense, yes. I am not a believer that the metaverse is a near-term business of scale. I think metaverse is an inevitable trend that we're heading towards in some fashion, but it's more likely to be manifested, in fact, through augmented reality, some kind of way of as they say, subtitling the world, right, so that we stay engaged in the physical world with digital tools. And I absolutely believe that's a virtue and a big business opportunity. I don't think that it's a big business opportunity of the kind of scale that Facebook, Google, or Amazon had to operate a immersive world using virtual reality. That is at most an opportunity for 200 or 300 million people who are the gamers of today. Maybe it would go to 500 million, but it's not going to go to a population of the world that just today hit 8 billion.
Right. So
whereas 8 billion of those 8 billion people, all but 3 billion of them are on Facebook, Google, Amazon, Alibaba, Tencent, etc. They're on there. That's like, 5 billion people are using these tools net. Are we going to get to a point where 5 billion people are going to be in the metaverse, in the kind of metaverse that Zuckerberg is presenting in our lifetimes? No.
I mean, is that the logical conclusion? It seems to me with Zuckerberg, it's the only place he can go. The metaverse is the logical next step for a man who's entirely lost his way, whose company has no coherent business model and lost its legitimacy. He's saying we have to live on the internet.
Wait a minute.
We have to live in the internet.
I'll agree with you and I'll disagree with you. To say that Facebook has no coherent business model is ridiculous. They are still one of the most profitable companies that was ever invented. And what many people forget is that for much of the last decade, they were the most profitable company per dollar of revenue in the history of capitalism.
So why are they edging away from their model?
The reason to give them a high valuation is just the growth would not last forever. And where he failed was not only in the metaverse vision, but also in the refusal to remediate the harms that his company was causing in politics, in disinformation, in social discord, in racial hatred, etc. He has been so besotted by the positives that his company does legitimately create that he refused to engage with the negatives to the degree they must be engaged with, which is why about 5 years ago or so, I became a very unrelenting critic of the company that I had really before that more or less celebrated. And I think it's fundamentally irresponsible and a tremendously negative example of business management that Zuckerberg, who has all power at that company, which is very unhealthy in itself, refuses to really even discuss the social harms that that company continues to create.
Right, and
I think that is a moral crime.
Right,
I think it's sort of delicious to observe the stock impact of the metaverse failure and the fact that ads are slowing down. Unfortunately, the market doesn't care about what I do.
Right, but I interviewed the Autodesk guy for my Keen On show earlier yesterday, and I asked him if he thought this Facebook catastrophe, I mean, in economic terms, will result in people edging away from the sort of the architecture of startups so that the founder can actually control the company and just that basically does whatever they like, which is
You
what
mean take away the super voting shares.
But let me ask you another question, David, because we don't have too much time, because I've got two important things to discuss. Firstly, Web 2 is obviously finished. Is there anything in this Web 3 vision? Or is it just marketing speak, just garbage?
Wait, I'm having a senior moment. What's the acronym of the imploding company that just the last 2 weeks?
FTX.
FTX.
Or is that basically F3? No, not F3. That was a Freudian error, not F3.
I think it's Bernie Madoff. I think the analogy there is Bernie Madoff, but
Well, FTX or Web3?
FTX.
And is there anything in Web3? I mean, everyone agrees that
I don't
FTX
like the Web3 appellation. I never have. I think it's ridiculous to blend a bunch of relatively unrelated things together just because they're supposedly the next big thing. I mean, Web3 is meant to represent the kind of combination of crypto and the metaverse, right? Well,
no authority,
they're not really directly
democratization.
connected. I don't think one is necessarily part of the other. I think Web3 is a term that was invented out of a desire to hype a set of opportunities that are real but are not the only opportunity. My own belief, which was the subject of our session at breakfast this morning and the following session with Lucas Joppa, is that the climate opportunity is the next big opportunity, commercially, economically, and from an investment point of view, and way, way better and bigger than the metaverse or crypto, although crypto and blockchain may be a very useful tool in making the climate transition as...
Right. So we've got 5 minutes, David. I want to talk specifically about the environment. So this is an event that began when I used to come in the old days. We used to talk about the internet. Now we talk about the environment, which I think is a good shift. I had a couple of questions. Firstly, what have we learned from the the various dot-com booms of the 90s? You and I have been through them all. The Web 2.0 boom, the crypto boom. What have we learned in terms of managing what might be a green boom, an environmental boom?
I think you and I probably disagree about this. I don't think it would be terrible to have a climate bubble, which is sort of what you think would happen if what I said before.
You invented that term, climate bubble. You said it was a good thing this morning.
Okay, maybe I did. I think if we could see a sudden surge of investor interest in climate technology to the point that it created a bunch of new Facebook, Google, Amazon-sized companies that went up for 10 years, that would be the best thing that the world could see right now, because it would pull in its wake enormous innovation that we desperately need to avoid immolation as a species, right? It's existential for us as humans to address this problem faster than we have, and if capitalism doesn't help us do it, it's not going to happen, because that's the system we live in.
So humanity rather than the internet industry, humanity is imploding.
No, humanity's not imploding. What do you mean?
Well, the planet's imploding.
I think the planet is at risk of not, I mean, look, as somebody said on the stage yesterday, the Mad Max scenario is not really out of sight as a possibility. I mean, if there was a nuclear attack on Ukraine right now, for example, that's a Mad Max scenario right there. And the counter, if you play the virtual reality game or experience that Games for Change have, there's a whole section in there about, one nuclear explosion mistake could lead to a catastrophic exchange of nuclear weapons by all kinds of parties. There's 9 countries in the world that have, nuclear weapons and missiles to shoot them places. And, that would implode humanity.
Let me just give you one.
I want to just make one other point about Web3, because the thing, and you and I agree on this, so you'll be glad I said this. One of the things I hate about the metaverse, particularly the way Zuckerberg presents it, is that it's presented as an escape from physical reality. We need to engage with physical reality, not escape from it. And I know you agree with that. And
well, who doesn't? Is there anyone here who wants to escape from physical reality? No, you could admit it. We don't mind. Nobody, right? And why does he even think that? He's got to be out of his mind.
Well, you know, he dropped out of college in his sophomore year.
But let me ask you let me just make one point, David, to conclude. It seems to me that Mariana Mazzucato, I don't know if you've ever had her at your event, but she's a British economist. She wrote a very good book about the iPhone, saying that to understand the value of the iPhone, you have to understand the public investment in technologies that enabled the iPhone. Do we need to rethink economics so that if we do indeed have your green bubble, which may be a good thing, it's better than having no bubble and no interest at all, do we need to start radically rethinking the value of companies so that if indeed in a public-private renaissance of the environment where you have both government and private companies' investment in new technologies, do we need to rethink their valuation so that we won't keep on going through these same disastrous cycles of overvalued companies
what do you
and
mean
bust?
We? I mean, we don't.
We as the
markets decide valuations. I mean, it's out of our control.
Yeah, but markets are determined by governments as well. They don't exist. You know, there were government before
I'm not
markets.
sure what you're asking, but if you're asking, you know, look, it was the U.S. government that essentially created the internet as a military tool initially, and if that hadn't been done, none of the stuff that we all live in would ever been possible.
Right, and that's Mazzucato's point.
Right. Well, I think we don't have that yet with climate. We don't have government establishing a platform for climate progress, although we see some movement toward that, particularly in the European Union. And I'm very bullish on movement in the EU towards climate regulation, facilitating climate innovation across 27 nations. And I think that's going to be the model for the whole world. We're going to have to emulate Europe. But so are we going to reconsider capitalism as a result of that? No.
It's not necessarily reconsidering capitalism. It's simply recognizing reality that the valuation of Facebook, as you've always said, they're the most profitable company in history. But one of the reasons why they're the most profitable company, because they never needed to pay for the R&D to create the product.
Well, it was built on open source software initially.
Well, it was, but no, I'm saying it was built on government, a military industrial investment in the internet itself. So if we come around to this new this new economy of innovative environmental stuff, do we need to rethink valuations?
I don't think it's possible for us to rethink valuations. I do think the idea that what you're putting out there that some entity, and it's got to be government, needs to create a platform for global climate innovation to make it facilitate it, which involves changes probably in electrical transmission standards and, licensing processes and, public education. There's a number of things that need to happen. That would be very good. But I actually believe, I wasn't always a capitalist, but I am a capitalist, and I believe that markets can be induced or incented to lead us to the kind of action we need.
Well, that's a perfect segue to our next speaker, isn't it?
Well, thank you for doing that.
Do I need to introduce? No, you're.
I'll introduce him.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you.